I was standing in front of my walk-in closet, carefully packing my silk blouses into my suitcase. This business trip to San Francisco was particularly important as it was tied to a crucial Series B funding round that would dictate the future of our venture capital firm. I felt my husband, Jason Brooks, approach from behind and wrap his arms around my waist. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his voice deep and affectionate as always. "Honey, you push yourself too hard. Why so much luggage if you're only going for a few days?" I offered a faint smile, the same one I had believed for the past few years was the genuine face of happiness. "I have to meet with a lot of partners and investors. I can't just show up looking thrown together." "I know," he said, holding me a little tighter. "It just hurts to see you always working so relentlessly. You could leave it all in my hands, stay home, and just live like a queen." In the past, I would have turned around with tears of emotion in my eyes to hug him, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. My name is Natalie Caldwell, and I am the CEO of Horizon Ventures, one of the most prestigious venture capital firms on Wall Street. In the public eye, I am a cold, decisive career woman, but with Jason, I softened into someone much more tender. He was the project director at our firm, a position I had personally handed him despite the whispers in the boardroom, because I trusted his abilities and his love blindly. I had always believed my success was his success, and that half of my achievements were due to his unconditional behind-the-scenes support. Lately, however, his sweet words weren't comforting me the way they used to. It was like a hairline fracture in a perfect sheet of glass, invisible to the naked eye but threatening to shatter at the slightest touch. A vague anxiety had begun to take root inside me. "I'm going to take a shower. Can you double-check my itinerary?" I gently slipped out of his arms, grabbed my pajamas, and went into the bathroom. I sank into the tub full of hot water, trying to wash away the exhaustion and the nameless unease creeping into my thoughts. It's probably just work stress. I'm being paranoid. With how much Jason loves me, it's impossible for anything to be wrong. When I stepped out of the bathroom, Jason wasn't in the bedroom. I assumed he was in the adjacent home office. I walked over to the nightstand to glance at the news before bed. Right next to my phone, the screen of Jason's phone lit up with a new message notification. I was never the type to snoop through my husband's phone, but the single line visible on the lock screen made my blood run cold. The sender was Haley Jenkins. The message was only partially visible. "Jason, my stomach hurts so much. I'm scared." My heart skipped a beat. Haley Jenkins. I remembered her. The pure, innocent-looking intern that Jason had recommended with such enthusiasm. He had told me she moved to New York all alone from a small town in the Midwest, that she was struggling financially but was incredibly hardworking and full of initiative. Thanks to an outstanding performance review he had drafted, I was the one who authorized a special end-of-year bonus for her. My stomach hurts and I'm scared. Why would an intern send such an intimate, ambiguous message to her boss late at night? Just then, Jason walked into the room. Seeing me staring blankly at his phone, a flash of pure panic crossed his face, but he quickly masked it behind his usual charming smile. He hurried over and snatched up the phone. "Ah, just another spam text. They've been non-stop lately." As he spoke, his fingers moved at lightning speed to delete the message. It was so fast I barely had time to process it. "Oh, okay," I replied, feigning indifference, though a hurricane had just touched down inside my chest. "Well, I'm going to sleep. You should get some rest too." I got into bed, turned my back to him, and pretended to close my eyes. I heard Jason let out a quiet sigh of relief before he turned off the lamp and slid in beside me. The room went dark, but my mind was more awake than ever. That wasn't a spam message. His panicked face, the speed at which he deleted it, everything betrayed him. Jason Brooks, the man I had trusted with my entire soul. The man I married despite my wealthy family's fierce opposition. What the hell was he hiding from me? His familiar scent and the warmth of his body were right there, but all I felt was a bone-chilling cold. I knew I couldn't confront him right now. Not without proof. My words would just sound like the baseless jealousy of an insecure wife. He was a master actor, and if I made one wrong move, he would just hide his tracks better. "All right, Jason. If you want to play a game, I'll gladly play along." This business trip to San Francisco suddenly didn't seem to be just about work anymore. I closed my eyes, but sleep had completely vanished. A silent war had just been declared, and the battlefield was my own bed. The next morning, I woke up with a radiant smile, as if that suspicious message from the night before had never existed. Jason looked visibly relieved to see me in such high spirits. His kindness and attentiveness multiplied tenfold. He made me breakfast, helped me with my coat, and kissed me at the door with a look of faux nostalgia. "Take care of yourself, honey. Call me the second you land, okay? I stood on my tiptoes and gave him a light peck on the cheek while internally fighting off an indescribable wave of disgust. Before heading to the firm, I set my own plan in motion. I stopped at a nearby coffee shop, opened my laptop, and got to work. I had thought a lot through the night to uncover the truth. I couldn't attack head-on. Arriving at the office, I went straight to Jason's suite. He was reviewing some documents and looked surprised to see me. "Natalie, what are you doing here? I thought you were heading straight to JFK." I walked up to him with a flirtatious smile, blending playfulness with practicality. "I forgot something. My primary Amex has been having some limit issues lately. I'll have a lot of entertainment expenses with the partners in SF, so just in case. Could I borrow your platinum card?" It was a completely normal request between a married couple, especially given the flexibility needed for high-end corporate expenses. Jason hesitated for a split second, but seeing my confident expression, he couldn't refuse. Saying no would have been far more suspicious. "Of course, my life. What's mine is yours." He happily pulled out his wallet and handed me his Chase Sapphire Reserve card. Holding it in my hand, I felt like I had just been handed the key to unlocking a terrible secret. I thanked him and said I really had to run to the airport now, but I didn't go anywhere. I went straight to my own office and locked the door. The first thing I did was call my bank's VIP customer service line. Using the card's details, I requested to reset the online banking access. As a top-tier client, my request was processed in minutes. 5 minutes later, I had successfully logged in. I took a deep breath, and with trembling hands clicked on Transaction History. A long list populated the screen. I patiently reviewed them one by one. The usual expenses, lunches, Uber Blacks, gas were nothing out of the ordinary. But my eyes stopped on the statements from the last 3 months. Dozens of receipts from Luxe Baby Boutique on Fifth Avenue, the most exclusive maternity store in Manhattan, newborn clothes imported formula, a top-of-the-line stroller, a crib. The total amounted to tens of thousands of dollars. I felt like someone was crushing my heart in their fist. But that wasn't all. Next were irregular monthly payments to St. Clair's Private Clinic, a luxury maternity hospital on the Upper East Side. And finally, the killing blow, a massive payment made just last week. The description clearly read VIP birth package, Haley Jenkins. Haley Jenkins. Her name plunged into my heart like a dagger. So, the text last night about her stomach hurting wasn't a lie. Those were contractions. Jason Brooks, the man I loved, had been using our money to cover all the expenses for his mistress, from her pregnancy straight through to her delivery. His audacity and vileness surpassed anything I could have ever imagined. Rage and agony consumed me. I was on the verge of smashing my laptop against the wall, but I restrained myself. Crying or breaking things wouldn't serve any purpose right now. I needed to be colder and more calculating than ever before. I immediately dialed my best friend and high-powered divorce attorney Vanessa Grant. "Van, I need your help." My voice was shaking uncontrollably. On the other end of the line, Vanessa instantly knew something was wrong. "Nat, what's going on? Where are you? I'm at the office. Jason is cheating on me. His mistress is going into labor right now." I recounted everything I had just discovered. Vanessa listened in dead silence, never interrupting. When I finished, her voice was firm, clinical, and rational. "Natalie, listen to me very carefully. First, under no circumstances do you let that man know you've found out. You have the absolute upper hand right now. Do not throw it away. Second, text me the address of that apartment in Tribeca he claimed he was renting out cheap to a relative. I'm sending a private investigator there immediately." "Okay," I replied, my voice already regaining its icy composure. Vanessa's call was the anchor that pulled me out of my emotional swamp. "Good. So what are you going to do about the San Francisco trip?" I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, the skyscrapers piercing the clouds. A glacial smile formed on my lips. "Oh, I'm definitely going. We have to play this theatrical production out to the very end." Love was dead. Now all that remained was calculation and vengeance. I was going to show Jason Brooks just how ruthlessly the woman he dared to betray could strip away every single thing she had ever given him. Sitting in my office, I stared blankly at the computer screen. I had just received an email from Vanessa. It was brief, but every word struck my chest like a hammer. "Nat, my guy, checked it out. There is no lease registered under any relative's name for that Tribeca apartment. According to the doorman, a young pregnant woman moved in a few months ago. He says Jason visits frequently, mostly at night." There was no room for doubt anymore. The story he invented about renting the condo to a poor relative was just a clumsy farce to hide his lies and turn my hard-earned money into a love nest for his mistress. Just how stupid did he think I was? I took a deep breath. The cold air filled my lungs and helped center me. I didn't shed a single tear. The pain was rapidly being replaced by wrath and steely determination. It was time to act. I couldn't allow these two shameless parasites to continue living comfortably off my sacrifices. I called Vanessa back. "Van, thank you. It's exactly what I expected. What's your next move?" Vanessa's voice was laced with concern. "Nat, don't do anything reckless. Protect yourself first." I know I answered my tone like absolute zero. I'm not going to cause a scene or pull her hair out. I want to catch them red-handed. I want him to have absolutely zero chance of inventing another lie. I laid out my plan to Vanessa. She stayed silent for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, I'll have my investigator assist you, but promise me one thing. Whatever you see, keep your cool. Our only goal right now is to gather admissible evidence so he pays for this in court." Understood, understood. My mind had never been clearer. After hanging up, I started rearranging my schedule. I had to play my part in this fake business trip perfectly. At lunchtime, Jason called me. His voice was dripping with honey. "Honey, have you eaten? Don't skip lunch, okay? I'm eating with a partner right now," I lied without blinking. "Oh, Jay, my flight got pushed to late afternoon. I'm leaving around 4 p.m. I don't think I'll have time to swing by the house." I said this on purpose to give him a wide enough window to act. If I left too early, he might get suspicious. If I left later, he'd think he had the entire afternoon free to handle his urgent business. "Oh, what a shame. I was going to pick you up for lunch," he said with fake disappointment. "Well, I guess I'll just drive you to JFK this afternoon. Sounds good, babe." I hung up with a sneer of disgust. His acting skills were improving daily, but it didn't matter. The more perfect the performance, the more agonizing the fall when the curtain dropped. I did nothing for the rest of the afternoon. I simply sat in my office in silence, mapping out my next steps. I reviewed all our joint and personal assets, the insurance policies, the investment portfolios. When this war was over, I would ensure Jason Brooks walked away without a single cent of my empire. If he wanted to play dirty, he couldn't blame me for being ruthless. Around 3 p.m., I grabbed my packed suitcase and left the building. I didn't go home. I went straight to a coffee shop near JFK Airport. I sat in a secluded corner and waited. I waited for the decisive moment, the moment the curtain would rise on this farce. At exactly 3:30, Jason's familiar Audi pulled up to the curb. He was still wearing his tailored suit, sporting that kind, attentive expression. He opened the car door for me and took the suitcase from my hands. Every gesture was that of a perfect gentleman. "Did you wait long?" "No, just got here." I smiled at him, a smile I had rehearsed all afternoon in front of the mirror. On the way to JFK Terminal 4, he didn't stop giving me instructions. "Take care of yourself out there. Don't overdo it. If anything happens, call me immediately. Don't keep things bottled up." I rested my head on his shoulder and nodded obediently. I know. Inside my heart was a block of ice. He would say those exact same words to Haley Jenkins. He would whisper those same sweet nothings while she carried his child. The more I thought about it, the more nauseated I felt. Disgusted by him and disgusted by myself for buying into this illusion for years. The car stopped at departures. Jason pulled my luggage from the trunk and walked me inside. He escorted me right up to the TSA security checkpoint, as if to ensure I was actually leaving. Right before the line, he pulled me in for a long, tight embrace. "I'm going to miss you," he whispered in my ear. I closed my eyes, suppressing the volcanic hatred boiling inside me. I hugged him back, intentionally letting my voice crack. "Me too. Take care of yourself all alone at home. Don't worry." "Silly," he smiled faintly, let go, and gently pushed me forward. "Go on, you're going to be late." I turned around with my suitcase. I didn't dare look back. If I met his gaze for one more second, I felt I would explode right there. I walked straight into the security line and blended into the crowd. I could feel Jason's eyes tracking me. I bypassed the actual screening area, circled around the ticketing counters, and slipped into a restroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, not from sadness, but from pure rage. I took a deep breath and composed myself. 5 minutes later, I walked out, but I didn't head toward the gates. I took an escalator down to the arrivals level. Everything was going according to plan. I pulled out my phone and called Vanessa. "I'm on my way out." "Has your guy started tailing his car?" "Yes." Vanessa's voice was solid and reliable. He just left the airport and is heading straight for Manhattan. Tribeca. Perfect. Keep a close tail. I'm grabbing a cab now. I hung up, stepped out to the curb, and hailed a yellow cab. As the taxi merged onto the Van Wyck Expressway, I looked back at the receding airport. Goodbye, Jason. Your play ends here. Now it's my turn to direct the next act, the one where you become the most miserable loser on earth. The taxi navigated through heavy New York City traffic. Sitting in the back seat, I gripped my phone tightly, never taking my eyes off the GPS tracking app Vanessa's investigator had shared with me. The red dot representing Jason's car was moving with absolute purpose. He had no intention of going back to our Greenwich Heights mansion. He was heading directly to that luxury high-rise in Tribeca, exactly as I predicted. Sir, could you step on it a bit, please? I urged the driver, feeling my chest burn. I didn't want to miss a single detail. When my taxi arrived, I asked the driver to park in a discreet spot across from the building's main entrance. From there, I had a clear view. I spotted the investigator's nondescript sedan already parked nearby. Everything was aligning. I waited. Every second felt like an eternity. I didn't know what I was waiting for, or rather what I dreaded facing. Despite my mental preparation, the moment the truth was about to bare itself, my heart wouldn't stop trembling. It was the raw ache of betrayal, a dull, persistent throbbing. About 15 minutes later, I saw Jason sprint out of the building's lobby. His usual polished, sophisticated demeanor was entirely gone. In its place was a look of extreme panic and frantic worry. He ran to his car and threw open the front and rear doors. And then the scene I feared most materialized. Jason ran back into the lobby and emerged moments later supporting a woman. It was Haley Jenkins. She was wearing a loose maternity dress. One hand cradled her heavily swollen belly and the other gripped Jason tightly. Her face was contorted in pain. She was in labor. Jason carefully helped her into the back seat, meticulously buckled her seatbelt, and leaned in to whisper something in her ear. That tender, concerned gaze. I thought it was reserved only for me. I was wrong. He could offer that tenderness to any woman carrying his child. Witnessing this scene with my own eyes brought my world completely crashing down. There were no illusions left, not a shred of hope. Love, marriage, home, everything I had painstakingly built over the years was nothing but a ridiculous farce. Jason quickly hopped into the driver's seat and the Audi sped off. I immediately called Vanessa's PI to tail him. Miss Caldwell, they are heading uptown. St. Clair's private clinic on the Upper East Side. St. Clair's, the exact name from the credit card statement. Behind my back, he had orchestrated everything perfectly to welcome his illegitimate child. Sir, follow them. St. Clair's clinic, Upper East Side, I told the cab driver. My voice sounded hollow. During the ride, I didn't cry. It was as if my tears had evaporated, leaving behind only a freezing void and a hatred that seeped into my marrow. I had given him a chance. I had deluded myself into thinking it could be a misunderstanding. But no, it was real. A raw, cruel truth. My husband, the man I loved with all my soul, had dropped me off for a business trip and immediately raced to deliver his mistress's baby. Jason, you're unbelievable. You successfully turned me into the most pathetic fool in the world. But you forgot one thing. Once this fool wakes up, she becomes more terrifying than you could ever imagine. St. Clair's private maternity clinic was one of the most exclusive private hospitals in New York. It wasn't loud and chaotic like a public hospital. It was quiet, discreet, and as luxurious as a 5-star hotel. Jason had chosen it to ensure Haley and his son received the best care and to avoid prying eyes. But he never imagined the one person he wanted to avoid most would be standing right here. I paid the cab and stepped out. I didn't go in immediately. I stood in a quiet corner of the opulent lobby, watching Jason frantically handle Haley's admission paperwork. He ran back and forth between the reception desk and the waiting area, beads of sweat on his forehead, but his eyes were shining with expectation and unadulterated joy, a joy I had never seen in him. Moments later, a nurse wheeled Haley toward the delivery suites. Jason jogged beside her, holding her hand tightly, constantly leaning down to comfort her. Baby, don't be scared. I'm right here with you. It'll be over soon. We're going to meet our baby. Jay, it hurts so much, Haley sobbed, her voice weak and pitiful. I know. Hang in there a little longer. You're so strong. He tenderly wiped the sweat from her brow. His eyes overflowed with love and compassion. I was standing only a few yards away like an invisible ghost, witnessing every frame of this pathetic melodrama. My heart didn't hurt anymore. It had gone entirely numb. So this was the real Jason when he actually loved someone. With me, it had probably been about utility and calculation from day one. I took a deep breath, adjusted my posture, and stepped slowly out of the shadows. I didn't say a word. I simply crossed my arms and stared at the two of them with glacial indifference. Jason was the first to notice me. When he lifted his head and his eyes locked onto mine, the smile on his lips instantly froze. The tenderness and love vanished from his face, replaced by shock, sheer terror, and absolute disbelief. "And Natalie," he stammered, his voice barely making it out of his throat. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be on a plane?" His face drained of color, turning as white as a sheet. He stared at me as if he were looking at the Grim Reaper. Haley, noticing Jason's reaction, turned her head. Seeing me, she went rigid momentarily, forgetting her own pain. The fragile, pitiful expression on her face morphed into guilt and profound fear. I offered a slight smile, but it was a smile as sharp as a scalpel. "Why are you surprised, Jason?" I said, my voice ringing unnervingly clear and calm in the quiet corridor. "It seems my presence has ruined your beautiful moment." Jason, as if waking from a nightmare, hastily dropped Haley's hand and rushed over to me. His expression was pure chaos. "Nat, listen to me. This isn't what you think. This is—" He tried to scramble for an excuse, but under my piercing gaze, all words felt futile. The play was over, and the lead actor had been caught red-handed on stage. I stood perfectly still, waiting to see what ridiculous fiction he was capable of inventing next. Jason stood paralyzed, his face now turning a sickly shade of blue. It was a truly pathetic sight. He looked from me to Haley, who was still huddled in the wheelchair. Every gesture betrayed his panic. "Natalie, please just listen," he stuttered, reaching out to grab my hand. "This is Haley. She's a distant cousin of mine. She's all alone in the city, no one to help her, and she's about to give birth. I was just helping her out a bit." A distant cousin. I almost laughed out loud. Even backed into a corner like this, he was capable of resorting to such a clumsy, laughable lie. Did he honestly believe he could trick me like a toddler helping her out? I repeated those 3 words, my voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. Does helping her out mean paying for a VIP birth suite? Does helping her out mean buying everything from diapers to imported formula? Jason, don't you think we've had enough theater for one day? Aren't you exhausted? Because just watching you is tiring me out. Every word I spoke was a needle popping the balloon of lies he was desperately trying to inflate. Jason's face changed color again. He knew he couldn't hide it anymore. The panic slowly faded, replaced by irritation and cornered anger. "Have you been having me followed?" he growled. His gaze shifted from fear to accusation. "Yes," I admitted, frankly not breaking eye contact. "If I hadn't followed you, I'd probably still be sitting at home like an idiot believing this woman is your distant cousin until the day you moved her and the baby into our house." He stood speechless, unable to fire back. Right at that moment, Haley in the background started moaning again. Her voice was wretched. "Jay, it hurts. It hurts so much." Her acting was truly relentless. She wanted to use the child to pull Jason's attention back, to remind him which of the 2 women was more important. Jason turned to look at her. A flash of genuine compassion crossed his eyes. It was that specific look that severed the absolute last thread of affection I had left for him. Right in front of his wife, he couldn't hide his desperate concern for his mistress. When he turned back to me, anger had completely overridden his rationality. Perhaps because his perfect plan was ruined, or perhaps because his mask was violently ripped off, he could no longer maintain his polished facade. "Natalie, you have no idea what you're doing," he yelled, his voice echoing down the pristine hallway. "What do you know? All you care about is your damn firm. Have you ever actually cared about me? Do you have any idea what I've had to put up with all this time?" I looked at him, my eyes like dead winter. "Put up with you? Dare use those words with me? I'm the one who has been putting up with you. I put up with your deception. I put up with you funding your mistress's lifestyle with my money. That I don't care about you," I let out a bitter laugh. "If I didn't care, do you really think that director title you hold would have just fallen into your lap, the Audi you drive, the mansion you live in? Is there a single thing you possess that isn't mine? Jason, you are an ungrateful, parasitic leech." My words were a match, striking the short fuse of his fragile ego. He was used to me spoiling him to a life of luxury without effort. Now that I was exposing his true nature without mercy, he completely lost control. "Shut your mouth," he roared. In a split second of blinding madness, he raised his hand. A sharp, cracking sound echoed, and the corridor seemed to freeze. My left cheek burned with a piercing, searing pain. I tasted the metallic tang of blood in my mouth. Jason had hit me. The man I once loved with all my soul, the man I risked my family's wrath for, had slapped me in a public place in front of his pregnant mistress. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply raised my head slowly and looked him dead in the eyes. In his, there was no trace of remorse, only rage and the twisted euphoria of a weak man who had finally lashed out. That slap didn't just cause physical pain, it shattered everything. Love, respect, memories, hope. It was all pulverized, reduced to ash. From this moment on, between Jason Brooks and me, there was nothing but pure, unadulterated hatred. The air around Jason's slap seemed to crystallize. Even Haley Jenkins stopped her moaning, watching the scene with wide, terrified eyes. She probably never expected Jason would actually dare to lay a hand on me. My cheek was on fire, but the physical sting was nothing compared to the absolute zero of my heart. Unflinching, I stared at Jason's rage-flushed face. My lack of reaction seemed to unnerve him. He probably expected me to break down in tears and cause a hysterical scene like other women. But I wasn't other women. Slowly, I raised my hand, not to touch my swelling cheek but to pull my iPhone from my designer bag. I opened the front-facing camera and calmly held the phone up. Click. The shutter sound was crisp. I took a photo of my face where the red mark of 5 fingers stood out starkly against my pale skin. Then I turned the camera around to capture the entire scene. Jason, still looking dazed, and Haley Jenkins in her wheelchair clutching her stomach in the background. A perfect piece of documentary evidence capturing both his infidelity and his assault. Jason looked bewildered by my actions. "What are you doing?" I dropped the phone back into my purse and smiled, a smile colder and more distant than anything he had ever seen. "What am I doing?" I said, my voice crystal clear, etching every syllable into the air. "I'm gathering evidence for the divorce suit. Jason, you are finished." With that, I turned on my heel and walked away with firm, commanding strides, refusing to grant them another second of my time. My stilettos clicked against the marble floor, a cold, decisive rhythm like war drums announcing the beginning of a slaughter. Behind me, I heard Jason shout my name, a chaotic mix of fury and dawning terror. I didn't look back. The bridge behind me had already burned to ash. I could only move forward, exiting the hospital. I breathed in the humid summer air of New York City. I didn't go home and I didn't go back to Wall Street. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of Vanessa Grant's law firm in Midtown. Only when I was sitting in the back of the cab did I allow myself to tremble. It wasn't fear. It was fury pushed to its absolute limit. I had been wrong. The greatest mistake of my life was trusting Jason Brooks, believing that love could bridge the gap in our backgrounds and ambitions. The result was a slap, literal and figurative, that snapped me into cold reality. When I arrived at Vanessa's office, she was waiting for me. Seeing the angry red mark on my cheek, she didn't say a word. She simply guided me into her sprawling corner office and handed me a glass of room-temperature water. "Did that bastard hit you?" Vanessa asked, her voice lethal. I nodded and showed her the photo I had just taken. I caught them both at St. Clair's. The woman was going into labor. Vanessa scrutinized the photo and furrowed her perfectly arched brows. "Well done, Nat. Very well done. This evidence is more than enough. Now listen to me. We are initiating a scorched earth protocol immediately." She pulled out a stack of legal pads and started outlining the maneuvers. First, freezing all joint accounts and revoking his authorized user status. Second, changing the locks on the Greenwich property. Third, serving him with the divorce papers accompanied by a temporary restraining order. "He assaulted you. We can legally bar him from coming within 300 feet of you." I listened and nodded firmly. "Do it. Show absolutely zero mercy. I want him to pay for every single thing he's done." "Don't worry," Vanessa said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder, her eyes blazing with predatory resolve. "We are going to win this war. I'll make sure that son of a bitch leaves with nothing but the shirt on his back." Looking at my fiercely loyal friend gave me a strange sense of calm. The pain was still there, but it could no longer break me. From this moment on, I was no longer Natalie Caldwell, the woman weakened by love. I was Natalie Caldwell, the apex predator fighting for my empire and my future. Leaving Vanessa's office, I felt reborn. Weakness and sorrow were left in the dust. Now, there was only determination and ice. If Jason wanted a war, I was going to show him what hell looked like. The first thing I did when I got into my waiting town car was call my executive assistant, Karen, a brilliant and fiercely loyal young woman. Karen, listen to my instructions, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Contact the finance department and our bankers immediately. Freeze all joint accounts and any credit cards associated with my name and Jason Brooks's name. Revoke his access to all company funds and expense accounts. Effective immediately, any transaction requires my personal signature. Execute this right now. Right away, Miss Caldwell, Karen replied without hesitation. She knew that once I made a decision, it was absolute law. I hung up and dialed the next number. This time it was the property management and security firm for our gated community in Greenwich. Hello, this is Natalie Caldwell, owner of Mansion 18 Inches Greenwich Heights. I need a crew out there this afternoon to change every physical lock and recode the entire smart home security system. From now on, I am the only authorized resident. Remove Jason Brooks from the gate access list immediately. Understood, Miss Caldwell. Dispatching a crew now. The final call was to a premium white glove moving company. I need an emergency pack and move service. Go to Mansion 18 Inches, Greenwich Heights. Pack up all personal belongings belonging to a man named Jason Brooks, currently located in the master suite and the home office. Clothes, shoes, books, personal electronics. Leave absolutely nothing of his. Pack it all carefully and transport it to a public storage facility in Newark, New Jersey. I will text you the exact address of the unit. Put it on my corporate card. After orchestrating the logistics, I had my driver take me up to Greenwich Heights. I didn't want to run into him. I just wanted to supervise from a distance to ensure my orders were executed flawlessly. When I arrived, the security company's team was already working with military precision. They installed new deadbolts and reset the biometric scanners. In under an hour, the sprawling estate was entirely under my control. Next came the moving crew. They worked with ruthless efficiency. His designer suits that I had bought, his imported Italian leather shoes, his golf clubs, everything was mercilessly boxed up. I watched the scene in silence from the back of my tinted SUV across the street. I didn't feel the slightest twinge in my chest. Those objects which were once symbols of my affection were now just dead weight that needed to be purged from my life. I suddenly remembered the clothes and trinkets Jason's mother kept in the guest suite for whenever she visited from Ohio. After a moment's thought, I called the moving foreman. Sir, please also pack up any belongings belonging to an older woman in the second-floor guest suite and send them to the Newark storage unit as well. If I was going to clean house, I was going to do it thoroughly. I didn't want a single trace of that family left in my sanctuary. When the last boxes were loaded into the truck and it drove away, the mansion felt strangely empty, but I felt a profound sense of liberation, as if a suffocating weight I had been carrying for years was suddenly lifted. Night was falling over Connecticut. I knew that right about now, Jason was probably at the hospital, intoxicated by the joy of becoming a father. He had absolutely no idea that a Category 5 hurricane was about to make landfall, a hurricane of my own making designed to wipe out everything he thought he owned. At the hospital, Jason gazed down at his newborn son. The anger and confusion from his clash with Natalie seemed to have evaporated. He felt only infinite pride and joy. He had a son, an heir to carry on his name. Haley, though exhausted from the delivery, smiled with satisfaction. Jay, the baby looks just like you, she said sweetly. Of course he does, Jason replied, kissing her forehead. He'll be just as smart and handsome as his dad. While he was lost in a beautiful daydream of a future filled with wealth and a son, a hospital billing administrator walked in. Mr. Brooks, please stop by the financial office to settle the remaining balance for the VIP suite. Yes, I'll be right there, Jason answered cheerfully. He thought to himself. It was nice of Natalie to have paid such a huge deposit up front. He confidently pulled out the Chase Sapphire Reserve card Natalie had handed him earlier and walked to the billing desk. Sir, this card is declining, the clerk said after swiping it several times. What do you mean declining? Jason frowned. Try it again. That card has an unlimited ceiling. I've tried it 3 times, sir. The system says the account has been closed. Closed. Jason froze. He quickly pulled out another card, a secondary Amex tied to Natalie's account. The result was the same. This card is also deactivated, sir. A sickening feeling washed over him. He tried to open his mobile banking app, but his login was locked out. The system notified him his access was revoked. Just then, his mother arrived, having taken a frantic last-minute flight from Ohio. Seeing her grandson, she couldn't contain her joy. Oh, my grandson, the heir to our family, he looks just like his father, but her joy was short-lived. Jason had to pull her aside and admit he was completely cut off without a dime. Hearing this, his mother nearly fainted and immediately began cursing Natalie. That barren witch, a hen that can't lay eggs and jealous on top of it. With no other choice, Jason had to pay the hospital balance using his mother's meager retirement savings. He decided to take Haley and the baby directly to the Greenwich mansion. He figured that no matter how angry Natalie was, it was still his legal residence and she couldn't just kick him out. Besides, he foolishly believed that seeing such an adorable baby might soften her heart. But when their Uber XL loaded with the three of them and all their hospital bags arrived at the gates of Greenwich Heights, Jason faced another brutal shock. The private security guard stopped the car. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks. You are no longer listed as a resident of this community. I cannot grant you access." "What are you talking about?" Jason yelled, his face turning purple. "I am the husband of Natalie Caldwell. I live at Mansion 18. I'm sorry, sir, Miss. Caldwell has permanently removed you from the access list. We're just following protocol." Jason couldn't believe his ears. He got out of the car, ran to the pedestrian gate, and started mashing the intercom button, screaming Natalie's name. But only dead silence answered him. His mother, sitting in the Uber, wailed and cursed while holding her grandson. Haley, sore from the delivery and exhausted, sat in stunned, terrified silence. Just as Jason was teetering on the edge of a total meltdown, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Natalie. He opened it frantically, praying she had cooled down. But the message was a single sentence, cold as liquid nitrogen. "Your belongings and your mother's have been moved to the public storage facility in Newark, New Jersey, Unit 234. I paid the first month's rent. After that, it's your problem. Never show your face in my life again." Jason gripped the phone until his knuckles cracked. His entire body shook with rage. He had been thrown out of his own home, left literally penniless on the street, with a complaining elderly mother, a postpartum mistress, and a crying newborn beside him. From the peak of success and happiness in barely half a day, he had plummeted into the abyss. And the one who pushed him was none other than the wife he had so callously betrayed. After being blacklisted from Greenwich, Jason, grinding his teeth, found a tiny, damp studio apartment in a rundown part of Newark. The musty smell and cramped space were pure torture for someone accustomed to high-end luxury. His mother, seeing their new reality, began crying and cursing that witch. "How dare she do this to my son and my grandson, the heir to our bloodline? Jason, you can't just sit here and take this. You need to go to her office and demand your rights." His mother's instigation, combined with his own festering fury and desperation, pushed Jason to decide it was time for a confrontation. He convinced himself Natalie couldn't truly be this ruthless. She was probably just throwing a temper tantrum. If he went there, made a scene, and pressured her publicly, she would cave to avoid the embarrassment. The next day, Jason and his mother marched into the towering Manhattan skyscraper that housed Horizon Ventures. Because he still had his employee keycard, he easily bypassed the lobby turnstiles. They took the elevator straight to the 38th floor where my executive suite was located. The entire office floor fell dead silent, staring at Jason. He was no longer the slick, confident project director. He looked unkempt with a scruffy beard and wrinkled clothes. Beside him was a middle-aged woman in cheap Midwest department store clothing, wearing a threatening scowl. "Where is Natalie Caldwell? Tell her to get out here right now," his mother shrieked at the reception desk, uncaring of the dozens of eyes on her. The terrified receptionist quickly flagged down my assistant. Karen ran out and intercepted them. "Mr. Brooks, ma'am, the CEO is in a critical board meeting and cannot see you. Please leave a message." "What damn meeting?" Jason's mother shoved Karen aside and marched toward my frosted glass office doors. "A woman who can't even pop out a kid, what kind of meeting is she having? She's just hiding from her responsibilities. She thinks she can hide today and avoid me forever." Her vicious, trashy insults echoed across the open plan floor. Employees from other departments poked their heads out, morbidly curious. Jason, instead of stopping, his mother stood there with a smug look of satisfaction, as if he enjoyed publicly humiliating me. The double doors of my suite suddenly swung open, but it wasn't me who stepped out. It was two massive corporate security guards. "Sir, ma'am, you need to leave immediately. This is a place of business, not a circus," one of them stated coldly. "How dare you try to kick me out?" Jason's mother glared at the guard. "Do you know who I am? I am Natalie Caldwell's mother-in-law. We don't care who you are. We have strict orders from the CEO to physically remove anyone causing a disturbance." With that, the guards moved in to grab them. That was when Jason shouted at the top of his lungs, playing to the crowd. "Natalie, come out here. Why are you hiding in there? How can you treat your husband and your mother-in-law like this? Do you have no heart? He was trying to win the sympathy of the office. But from behind my doors there was only silence. At that moment, a sharp-suited man approached. It was an associate attorney from Vanessa Grant's firm. He calmly handed Jason a thick stack of manila envelopes. "Mr. Brooks, I am legal counsel for Miss Natalie Caldwell. You have just been served. This is the petition for divorce with attached evidence of your adultery and domestic violence. And this is a temporary restraining order issued by a New York judge. Effective immediately. If you come within 300 feet of Miss Caldwell, we will have the NYPD arrest you." Jason froze, staring at the heavy documents in his hands. Divorce petition, proof of adultery, assault tort, restraining order. Natalie had moved faster, and with vastly more lethal precision than he could ever have imagined. Every single escape route was bricked up. His mother, oblivious to the legal gravity, saw her son stall and grew even more emboldened. Divorce. What garbage is this? There are no divorces in our family. If my son made a mistake, it's that spoiled brat's fault. Since she couldn't give him kids, my son had to look elsewhere. It's only natural. Please escort them out, the attorney told the guards. Losing their patience, the guards grabbed Jason and his screaming mother by the arms and dragged them unceremoniously to the freight elevators in full view of the entire firm. Like cornered animals, Jason and his mother were consumed by humiliation, fury, and impotence. Before the elevator doors shut, Jason screamed one last desperate threat. "Natalie, you think you've won, but just wait, you won't get away with this." The elevator doors closed and professional silence returned to the 38th floor. From the other side of my frosted glass, I observed the spectacle with a glacial smile. "Jason, what do you honestly think you can do to me now? You lost this game the second you raised your hand against me." Humiliated and ejected from the building, Jason and his mother trudged back to the miserable Newark studio. The shock of the divorce papers and the restraining order left Jason completely shattered. He collapsed onto the squeaky mattress, holding his head in his hands. It had all happened too fast, too viciously. He had catastrophically underestimated Natalie. She wasn't the docile ATM he thought he could manipulate. She was an apex predator who once crossed ripped throats out. His mother, after cursing a blue streak, finally broke down in tears. "Oh, what a disaster. All that effort to get my son a good career and a rich wife. And look how it ends. That witch is dead set on ruining our family." Jason said nothing. His mind was a vortex of panic. No money, no house, and now legally barred from his job. Natalie had frozen him out of existence, leaving him literally on the street. What could he do? Go back to Ohio? He couldn't. The man who paraded around as a high-rolling Wall Street director couldn't endure the shame of returning to his hometown a broke failure, becoming the laughingstock of everyone he knew. In that moment of rock-bottom despair, he heard the sharp wail of the baby from the next room. Haley was struggling to soothe the newborn. That cry was like a lightning bolt in Jason's mind. Of course, he still had one final ultimate weapon, a weapon Natalie could never have, a son. He jumped up and rushed into Haley's room. Seeing the tiny life in his mistress's arms, an intense manic hope surged through him. "Mom, stop crying," he said, his voice hardening. "We haven't lost yet. We have him." He pointed at the baby. His mother, eyes rimmed with tears, looked at her grandson and the light bulb flickered on. Right, we have the heir, the blood of our family." Jason took the baby in his arms. Feeling the weight of the child, he knew this wasn't just a son. This was his trump card. Natalie couldn't have children. That was her fatal weakness. No matter how rich or powerful she was in New York, in the eyes of people like his mother, she would always be an incomplete woman. "She wants a divorce. Fine," Jason said, his voice turning, calculating and greedy. "But she's going to pay us out. This boy is my son. Even if we divorce, she has a legal and moral responsibility as my spouse during the marriage to maintain my standard of living so I can support my child. We will demand an astronomical alimony and child support settlement. Enough for the three of us to live like royalty for the rest of our lives." Hearing this, his mother's eyes widened with greed. "Of course we have to bleed her dry with all the money she hoards. What's a few million for her grandson since she can't have them? My son gave her the opportunity to be a mother, even if it's just on paper. She should be getting down on her knees and thanking us." Haley, sitting on the bed, listened to the mother-son duo with growing hope. She didn't care about the divorce. She only cared about the payout. If Jason managed to extract a fortune from Natalie, her and her child's future in New York would be set. Thus, in that damp Newark studio, three people each, with their own selfish machinations, found a common goal: They dumped all their chips onto the newborn baby. They believed this child was the golden key that would unlock the vault to Natalie Caldwell's empire. Jason hired a low-rent, aggressive divorce lawyer who worked on contingency. They began drafting their demands. Not only did they ask for massive alimony, but with absolute shamelessness, they demanded 50% of her entire net worth, claiming Jason's fundamental contributions to the growth of Horizon Ventures. He was convinced that with a child in the picture and the threat of a messy public trial, he held the winning hand. He swore he would make Natalie regret ever crossing him. A few weeks later, we had our first conciliation hearing in Manhattan Family Court. I walked into the courtroom projecting absolute serenity and ice. Beside me was Vanessa, who looked even sharper and more lethal than I did. On the opposing side sat Jason. He had tried to clean himself up, wearing the only decent suit he hadn't left at the mansion. Beside him sat his mother and his sleazy lawyer, who looked completely out of his depth. The session commenced. After the judge read the preliminary filings, Jason's attorney took the floor. "Your Honor," he began, puffing his chest with a booming theatrical voice. "We are here to resolve the dissolution of marriage between my client Mr. Jason Brooks and Miss Natalie Caldwell. Their marriage lasted 5 years, during which my client was a devoted husband, an exemplary son-in-law, and crucially, a foundational pillar in the explosive growth of Horizon Ventures, the firm Miss Caldwell currently oversees." Hearing that, I allowed a microscopic smirk to touch my lips. Foundational pillar. The sheer audacity. The lawyer continued, painting Jason as a titan of industry and a paragon of virtue. With his strategic vision and exceptional business acumen, Miss Brooks personally secured projects valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, generating massive profits for the firm. He sacrificed his personal time, his youth, and poured his blood, sweat, and tears into the family business. It is no exaggeration to state that half of the wealth Miss Caldwell hoards today is a direct result of my client's labor. Jason nodded, feigning humble sacrifice. His mother puffed out her chest, glaring at me with arrogant triumph. But then the lawyer dramatically shifted his tone, adopting a voice of deep, sorrowful pity. "In exchange for such immense sacrifice, Miss Caldwell was an icy, work-obsessed spouse who fundamentally failed to fulfill her natural duties as a mother. This created an irreparable fissure in their marital life. And at the peak of their conflict, she ruthlessly expelled her husband and her elderly mother-in-law from their home, freezing all his assets and leaving my client in a state of extreme, dangerous destitution." He paused for effect, scanning the courtroom before delivering his final demand. "For these reasons, we petition Your Honor for the following. First, that the divorce be granted. Second, regarding the division of assets, we demand 50% of all assets held by Miss Caldwell, including the Greenwich estate, the luxury vehicle fleet, all bank deposits, and a 50% equity stake in Horizon Ventures be awarded to my client. It is the only fair compensation for his years of uncompensated dedication." A brief silence fell over the courtroom. Even the judge raised an eyebrow at the sheer brazenness of the demand. Beside me, Vanessa remained completely impassive, a faint predatory smile playing on her lips. Jason's lawyer sat down looking incredibly smug, as if he had just delivered a masterclass. Jason looked at me with a mix of defiance and glee. He truly believed that by dragging my name through the mud and inflating his own worth, he would force my hand. He thought I would quietly pay him millions just to protect my firm's reputation. He was dead wrong. In this game, I wasn't yielding a single millimeter. When Jason's lawyer finished, the judge turned to our table. "Counsel for the respondent. Do you have a rebuttal?" Vanessa stood up with predatory elegance. She didn't rush to attack. Instead, she offered opposing counsel a perfectly polite, patronizing smile. "Your Honor and esteemed opposing counsel," she began, her voice clear, authoritative, and ringing with steel. "We have just been treated to a very moving modern fairy tale about a selfless, highly competent husband. Unfortunately, fairy tales belong in the fiction section, and the reality of this case is the exact opposite." Jason and his lawyer frowned. Opposing counsel claims that Mr. Brooks, through his foundational contributions, secured projects worth hundreds of millions. We were deeply curious about these supposed contributions. Therefore, we prepared some documentation. She signaled her paralegal. A massive, heavily bound dossier was handed to the judge and to Jason's table. "Your Honor, this is the audited financial report and performance evaluation of all projects at Horizon Ventures over the last 3 years, verified by an independent Big Four accounting firm." Vanessa pointed to the documents. I direct Your Honor and opposing counsel to page 15, the summary of projects personally managed by the project director, Mr. Jason Brooks. Jason frantically flipped to page 15. The color instantly drained from his face. Vanessa didn't give him a second to breathe. Her voice rose in volume. According to the audit over the last 3 years, Mr. Brooks managed a total of 5 investment portfolios. The result? 3 of them generated catastrophic losses, costing the firm over $50 million in damages. The other 2 barely broke even, yet their operational overhead was 30% higher than the firm's average. The multi-million-dollar projects opposing counsel speaks of simply do not exist. In reality, Mr. Brooks was a massive financial liability, a bleeding wound that had to be constantly subsidized by the profits generated by my client and other departments. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Jason's lawyer turned pale and stammered, "These numbers are manipulated. Manipulated." Vanessa laughed, a sharp, icy laugh. "Counsel, this is a forensic audit from a Big 4 firm. If you insist it's manipulated, we will gladly subpoena their lead auditor to testify under oath. Or is your client so exceptionally brilliant that he managed to trick international corporate auditing software?" The lawyer swallowed hard, completely silenced. Jason hung his head, visibly trembling with a cocktail of rage and profound humiliation. But Vanessa was just getting started. As for Mr. Brooks's supposed dedication and sacrifice, we have clarity on that as well. It is true that my client, Miss Caldwell, is deeply dedicated to her work, but it is entirely because of her relentless effort that Mr. Brooks was able to enjoy a lifestyle of grotesque luxury he could never have achieved on his own merit. She presented a second dossier. These are the credit card statements and bank ledgers for all accounts Miss Caldwell provided to Mr. Brooks over the last 5 years. High-end sports cars, bespoke designer wardrobes, luxury vacations, fine dining. Every single cent was funded exclusively by my client. So what exactly is the sacrifice? Mr. Brooks speaks of sacrificing his leisure time to swipe his wife's credit card. At that point, Jason couldn't take the public evisceration. He jumped up and pointed a trembling finger at Vanessa. "You shut your mouth, you're twisting everything. Mr. Brooks, sit down immediately," the judge barked, slamming his gavel. Jason sat down forcefully, but his glare toward us was murderous. Vanessa smiled and delivered the kill shot. "And finally, Your Honor, regarding the absurd demand for a 50% split of the estate. This petition is legally frivolous. Every single asset listed by the petitioner, the Greenwich estate, the vehicles, and the equity in Horizon Ventures are separate property acquired by Miss Caldwell prior to the marriage. We have submitted the notarized prenuptial agreement that explicitly protects these assets. Under New York state law, Mr. Brooks has absolutely no legal claim to a single dime of this separate property." Absolute silence reigned in the courtroom. Vanessa's declaration struck Jason and his mother like a physical blow. They sat entirely stunned, unable to process what had just happened. Their grand scheme to hijack half my empire using his fake business merits had been obliterated in the first 5 minutes of the hearing. The evidence presented by Vanessa acted like a bucket of ice water dumped over Jason and his legal counsel. His inexperienced lawyer was visibly sweating through his cheap suit, unable to offer a single coherent legal rebuttal. Jason kept his head bowed, gripping the table edge so hard his knuckles turned white. Humiliation and fury were eating him alive from the inside out. He had never imagined Natalie would be so meticulously prepared, leaving him zero room to maneuver. Seeing their primary strategy go up in flames, Jason's lawyer panicked and hastily pivoted tactics. With the judge's permission, he stood up again. This time, his booming confidence was gone, replaced by a tone of desperate, manufactured pathos. "Your Honor," he began, shooting me a glare of manufactured moral outrage. "It is true. Those assets are legally under Miss Caldwell's name. My client, blinded by his immense love and implicit trust in his wife, never concerned himself with such legal minutiae. He believed that what was hers was his, that they were building a family together. But he was terribly misguided." He paused, aiming for maximum dramatic effect. "What my client yearned for most in this marriage was not money or status. It was a child, the warmth of a complete family. But Your Honor, Miss Caldwell was so obsessively focused on her business empire that she failed in the most basic, fundamental role of a woman. She could not bear children." His words dropped like a grenade in the quiet courtroom. All eyes shifted to me. Jason's mother seized the opening to start sobbing loudly, putting on a pitiful show. Oh, the misery of our family. Other women give their families grandchildren, but my son, who only ever dreamed of having an heir, was denied. Imagine the endless suffering of my poor boy, Your Honor. Jason's lawyer nodded solemnly and pressed on. It was precisely because of this emotional neglect and his overwhelming innate desire to be a father that my client made a tragic misstep. He fathered a child outside the marriage, but that innocent newborn is not to blame. He needs a father, and he needs the financial stability to grow up healthy and secure. My client, having been ruthlessly thrown into the streets by Miss Caldwell, is destitute and cannot provide for his son. And there it was, the true motive laid bare. Therefore, the lawyer said, staring directly at the judge, since the 50% division is contested, we pivot our demand. We demand that Miss Caldwell, as the legal spouse during the time of conception, assume the financial responsibility to support her husband's child. To guarantee the child's future, we demand a lump sum spousal support and emotional damage payout of $5 million. This is the bare minimum compensation Miss Caldwell owes for the immense psychological damage she inflicted on my client. $5 million. The gallery began murmuring again. This wasn't alimony or child support. This was straight-up extortion. They were using a newborn baby to blackmail me for a fortune. Jason lifted his head and stared at me with pure, arrogant defiance. He believed this was his ultimate trump card, his unbeatable hand. He was convinced that I, to protect my pride, avoid public scandal, and escape the stigma of being labeled a barren wife, would fold and pay the ransom. He wanted to use his illegitimate child to deal the final blow to humiliate me and rob me blind. I remained seated, my face an unreadable mask. I glanced sideways at Vanessa. She glanced back. A razor-sharp glint flashed in her eyes. Yes, Jason, this is exactly the moment I've been waiting for. You just walked yourself right into the slaughterhouse. The best act of this play is about to begin. The sheer audacity of Jason's legal team hung heavily in the air. Everyone in the room was waiting for my reaction. They probably expected me to explode in rage, to shout objections, to crumble under the public humiliation of my infertility being weaponized against me. But I didn't move a muscle. Vanessa stood up. There wasn't a trace of anger on her face. Instead, she wore an expression of profound, almost saintly indulgence. Your Honor, she said, her voice shockingly gentle. We completely understand the sentiments of Mr. Brooks and his family. Desiring an heir to carry on one's legacy is a deeply human, legitimate wish. Hearing Vanessa say this, Jason and his lawyer looked visibly stunned. They never expected us to validate their twisted logic so easily. Vanessa continued, her voice practically dripping with empathy. My client, Miss Caldwell, is a woman of immense grace and a large heart. Even though Mr. Brooks committed a grievous betrayal that destroyed their marriage, she agrees that the newborn child is entirely innocent. That child deserves the best possible future. Upon hearing this, Jason's mother stopped her fake sobbing, a massive greedy grin spreading across her face. Jason puffed out his chest, utterly convinced that I had folded under the pressure of public shame and was preparing to cut a check. Therefore, Vanessa said, turning her gaze directly onto Jason, regarding the petition for financial support for the child, my client is in full agreement. The opposing table practically vibrated with shock. In agreement, just like that. In fact, Vanessa went on, and with every word she spoke, the tension in the room ratcheted higher. My client not only agrees to the $5 million demand, she is prepared to establish an irrevocable trust fund of $10 million for the child, guaranteeing him a life of absolute privilege until he reaches adulthood. $10 million. The figure dwarfed Jason's wildest, greediest fantasies. He sat there dumbfounded, an uncontrollable, ravenous greed igniting in his eyes. His mother looked like she was about to do a victory dance right there in the gallery. They thought they had won. They thought they had perfectly exploited my weakest point. But they celebrated too soon. After dangling the ultimate bait, Vanessa slowly, methodically swung the axe. However, she said, maintaining her polite smile, but her eyes now locking onto Jason with lethal intensity, in order to legally secure such a massive transfer of wealth, and to ensure it reaches the correct legal beneficiary, we require one minor standard legal procedure. She paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. We formally request that the court order a court-admissible DNA paternity test to confirm the biological relationship between Mr. Jason Brooks and the child born to Miss Haley Jenkins. This is an indispensable fiduciary requirement to execute the $10 million trust and ensure full legal transparency. The air in the courtroom instantly froze. Jason, who had been floating in a daydream of $10 million, actually burst out laughing at the demand. He looked at Vanessa and me with a mix of sneering, contempt, and pity. A DNA test, he scoffed loudly, his voice thick with arrogance. Absolutely. I'm 100% in favor. I was afraid you wouldn't have the guts to ask for one. Do it today. We'll prove to the whole damn world that I am the father of this boy. I wonder how you're going to show your face in public after this, Natalie. He genuinely thought this was a golden opportunity to publicly humiliate me one final time. He believed the DNA results would be undeniable proof of his virility and my failure. He accepted the demand instantly without a shred of hesitation. His lawyer nodded eagerly. Your Honor, we fully consent to the paternity test order. The judge looked down at me. Seeing that Vanessa and I remained completely unbothered, he nodded. Very well. The court approves the motion for a mandatory DNA paternity test. The results will be unsealed and read into the record at the next scheduled hearing. The judge slammed his gavel. Court was adjourned. Jason and his mother strutted out of the courtroom like royalty, absolutely convinced total victory was already in their grasp. They were already spending the $10 million in their heads, dreaming of the total humiliation I was about to suffer. As I watched their retreating backs, a slow, dark smile finally broke across my face. Jason, you are so breathtakingly naive. Do you not realize that your own boundless arrogance and greed just pushed you off the edge of the cliff? The masterpiece you spent so much energy directing is about to reach its grand finale. 1 week later, the follow-up hearing took place. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thicker and more tense than before. Jason and his mother arrived early, making zero effort to hide their smug anticipation. Jason even shot me a provocative, mocking grin across the aisle, as if to say, watch and weep. Haley hadn't attended. She was likely at the Newark apartment nursing the baby and eagerly waiting for the call that they were multimillionaires. I sat there, my expression as serene as a glassy lake. Beside me, Vanessa calmly sorted her legal pads, occasionally throwing a highly amused knowing glance at the opposing table. The judge entered and the bailiff called the room to order. After shuffling some paperwork, the judge spoke, his voice grave and solemn. Today, the court will unseal and announce the results of the court-ordered DNA paternity test conducted by the New York State Department of Health Forensic Laboratory between the petitioner Mr. Jason Brooks and the male infant born to Miss Haley Jenkins. He picked up a heavily sealed manila envelope and carefully sliced it open. Across the aisle, Jason visibly puffed up his chest, sitting up straight, ready to claim his crown of glory. His mother clasped her hands together in prayer, muttering excitedly under her breath. The judge slowly unfolded the official lab report. He scanned the document and a deep furrow appeared between his brows. An expression of profound surprise crossed his normally stoic face. This slight change in demeanor unsettled Jason for a fraction of a second, but he quickly mentally waved it away as just pre-victory jitters. After a few seconds of silence that felt like a lifetime, the judge cleared his throat and read the final conclusion aloud. Every single word rang out like a gunshot in the silent room. Based on the genetic analysis of the provided samples, the New York State Department of Health confirms that the probability of paternity between Mr. Jason Brooks and the infant in question is 0%. Paternity is categorically excluded. A graveyard silence descended upon the courtroom. Paternity is categorically excluded. Those 4 words struck Jason like a barrage of cruise missiles. The smug, victorious grin plastered on his face froze, cracked, and then completely shattered. His complexion went from flush red to stark white to a sickly, oxygen-deprived gray. He sat totally paralyzed, his eyes bulging out of his skull, staring at the judge as if the man had just spoken in tongues. No, that can't be right, he muttered, his voice barely a raspy whisper. That's impossible. There's a mistake. The lab made a mistake. His mother, sitting beside him, looked like she had been hit by a truck. She couldn't process the reality. She grabbed her son's arm and shook it violently. Jason, what is the judge talking about? It's a mistake, right? That's my grandson. The gallery erupted into frantic whispering. Every eye in the room drilled into Jason, a potent mix of shock, pity, and raw mockery. Order in the court, the judge commanded, slamming his gavel hard. This is the official verified result from a certified state forensic laboratory, bearing all required seals and signatures. There is zero margin for error. Mr. Brooks, did you hear me clearly? Jason couldn't hear anything. A deafening ringing filled his ears and the room seemed to spin violently out of control. He had bet his entire life, his entire future on the son he so desperately wanted. He had weaponized that child to fight me, to blackmail me, to humiliate me, and now that exact same weapon had violently backfired, blowing a hole straight through his chest. The child wasn't his. So what was he? A pathetic cuckold who had been paying to raise another man's bastard, a complete fool who threw away a billionaire wife for a woman who was playing him the entire time. This truth was infinitely more savage than me, freezing his bank accounts or throwing him onto the street. It completely annihilated his ego, his pride, and his very manhood. He had lost it all, his wife, his mansion, his money, his career, and now, even the son he had paraded around like a trophy wasn't his. He slumped back into his chair as if his spine had been removed. He slowly turned his head to look at me. In his eyes there was no more arrogance, no more provocation. There was only absolute panic, bottomless despair, and a rabid, cornered hatred. I simply stared back at him, devoid of all emotion. Then, the corner of my mouth, which had been perfectly rigid throughout the entire trial, finally curled up into a slow, victorious smile. "Jason, this is the exact price of your betrayal and your profound stupidity." The hearing devolved into total chaos. Jason practically lost his mind. He jumped up, screaming that the results were forged, that I had bribed the state laboratory, that it was a massive conspiracy. But faced with the unarguable sealed forensic documents, his screaming was just the barking of a madman. He and his hysterical mother were physically escorted out of the courtroom by court officers, a thoroughly pathetic spectacle. Vanessa and I walked out calmly, the picture of Wall Street elegance. "Wow, what a soap opera," Vanessa remarked dryly as we walked down the courthouse steps. "That is genuinely the first divorce case I've ever seen where the petitioner aggressively digs his own grave with a backhoe on the record." I offered a faint smile. He was just too arrogant and too greedy. I knew Jason wouldn't just take this lying down. He would immediately hunt down Haley for answers, and I was highly anticipating the fallout of his next act. Sure enough, the moment he was thrown out of the courthouse, Jason didn't return to the Newark studio right away. He hailed a cab and went straight to wherever Haley had holed up. He was past the point of rational thought. The humiliation and rage had mutated him into a rabid dog. He kicked the door to the studio wide open. Haley was sitting on the awful mattress, feeding the baby a bottle. She jumped in terror at the sight of Jason's bloodshot, murderous expression. "Jay, why are you back so early? Did it go well?" "Well," Jason snarled, his eyes bulging. He ripped the DNA report out of his coat pocket and violently threw it at her face. "Look at this. Look at what you've done to me." Haley picked up the crumpled paper with trembling hands. When her eyes scanned down to paternity as categorically excluded, her face was drained of all blood. "How is this possible? No, it can't be. There has to be a mistake," she stammered, but the sheer blinding panic in her eyes gave her away instantly. "A mistake?" Jason lunged forward, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her violently. "You still have the nerve to say it's a mistake. Tell me right now, whose bastard is this?" Faced with Jason's violent rage, Haley was gripped by primal fear and broke down in hysterical tears. "I don't know. I swear to God, I don't know. You don't know," Jason roared, squeezing her shoulders so hard she thought her collarbones would snap. "You sleep with another man and you don't even know who the father is. Do you think I'm a total retard?" Under Jason's relentless physical intimidation and screaming, Haley's defenses finally crumbled. Between violent sobs, she confessed everything. "Yes. I wasn't sure. I didn't know if it was your baby or his." "Who the hell is he?" My ex-boyfriend," Haley sobbed. "He comes from a really wealthy family in New York, but his parents hated me and forced him to break up with me. I met you right when things were ending with him. You were so nice to me. And when I found out your wife was a multi-millionaire CEO, I figured if I latched onto you, my future would be secure. A calculated scam. So while you were playing house with me, you were still spreading your legs for that rich prick," Jason said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, trembling pitch. Haley nodded, weeping uncontrollably. "I'm sorry. When I found out I was pregnant, I really didn't know whose it was. But your mother kept saying she wanted a grandson, that if I gave her a boy, she'd make sure I got whatever I wanted. And since it looked like you were going to take half your wife's fortune, I took a gamble. I didn't know it would end up like this." "Shut up," Jason roared, shoving her violently back onto the bed. He stood there, panting heavily, feeling entirely hollowly empty. He hadn't been a mastermind. He had been a pawn on her chessboard, a convenient backup plan, a useful idiot designated to raise another man's bastard. The sweet romance, the innocent fragility, it was all a perfectly executed act. She had never loved him. She only loved the money and status he was stealing from his wife to give to her. Jason threw his head back and began to laugh. A hysterical, bleak, terrifying laugh. He was laughing at his own staggering stupidity. He had thrown away a brilliant, wealthy, loyal wife who handed him the world on a silver platter, all to chase after a manipulative, gold-digging whore. And in exchange for his epic betrayal, he had lost the universe. The curtain had fallen on his romance, revealing the ugliest, most miserable truth imaginable. The revelation about the child during the hearing was the absolute kill shot that obliterated Jason Brooks. He stood motionless in the courtroom, staring into the void like a soulless mannequin. Every single one of his grand plans and greedy hopes had gone up in smoke. Not only had he failed catastrophically, but he had crowned himself the biggest, most pathetic laughingstock in New York. The judge, slamming his gavel, snapped the room back to reality. With a severe glare, but a faint undercurrent of pity, he delivered the final ruling. Having examined all submitted evidence and the testimonies of both parties, the Manhattan Family Court hereby issues the following decree. The gallery held its breath. Article 1. The petition for divorce between the respondent, Mr. Jason Brooks, and the petitioner, Miss Natalie Caldwell, is hereby granted. Effective immediately, the marital union is legally dissolved. Jason didn't even twitch. The divorce, which he once saw as his golden ticket to steal my fortune and marry his mistress, was now a death sentence. The judge continued, his tone unwavering. Article 2. Regarding the division of assets, the court formally recognizes that all high-value assets in dispute, including the Greenwich, Connecticut real estate, all luxury vehicles, and all corporate equity in Horizon Ventures, are legally designated as the separate, premarital property of Miss Caldwell. Therefore, the respondent's motion to divide 50% of the estate is denied in its entirety. Mr. Brooks is entitled to exactly 0% of said assets. His mother, sitting in the back row, nearly passed out upon hearing this. Despite all her screaming, cursing, and crying, she couldn't comprehend that her son was walking away without a single penny. Her delusions of becoming the matriarch of a wealthy New York family, living in a mansion and being chauffeured in luxury cars, had been pulverized to dust. But the worst was yet to come. Article 3, the judge stated, locking eyes with Jason, his voice turning exceptionally harsh. Based on the undeniable evidence submitted by the petitioner, including photographic documentation of injuries and the subpoenaed security footage from Suite 10, Claire's Clinic, this court finds that Mr. Jason Brooks committed domestic battery against Miss Natalie Caldwell. This is a severe, actionable tort that caused documented physical and emotional distress. Jason shuddered, finally lifting his head. Pure terror bled into his eyes. Therefore, the court rules in favor of Miss Caldwell on the civil tort claim, ordering Mr. Jason Brooks to pay damages in the sum of $500,000. $500,000. This judgment must be satisfied within 30 days of this ruling becoming final. $500,000. That number was the final nail in Jason's coffin. Not only was he walking away with nothing, but he had just been slammed with a massive $500,000 judgment. For a man currently living in a squalid Newark studio, $500,000 was an astronomical, unpayable debt. I object, Jason screamed, leaping out of his chair like a madman. I don't have that kind of money. Where the hell am I supposed to get $500,000? That woman took everything from me. She's trying to kill me. Silence. The judge roared, slamming the gavel so hard it echoed like a gunshot. You have the right to appeal within 30 days. If you fail to satisfy the judgment, your future wages will be garnished and you will face severe legal consequences. Court is adjourned. The judge stood up and briskly left the bench, leaving behind a completely destroyed Jason and a gallery buzzing with gossip. He had lost it all. Wife, mansion, cars, money, career. Even the son he was so insanely proud of wasn't his. And now he was saddled with a crushing, lifelong debt. From a Wall Street director living like a king, he had been reduced to an impoverished, debt-ridden outcast, and the punchline to a brutal joke. I walked out of the courtroom with Vanessa projecting total calm. As I walked past Jason, I didn't even look at him. To me, he was already a complete stranger, a filthy memory that needed to be scrubbed clean. His mother, seeing me walk by, tried to lunge at me, shrieking insults. You whore, you ruined my son, you venomous snake, you'll rot in hell. But before she could even get within a few feet of me, the armed court officers intercepted her and shoved her back. I kept walking, never breaking my stride, never looking back. Her insults were nothing more than the wind rustling against my ears. Stepping out of the courthouse, the blinding summer sun of Manhattan washed over me. I took a deep breath. My chest felt strangely, wonderfully light. The war was over and I had won, but it wasn't a joyous victory. It was simply the necessary eradication of a past mistake. From this day forward, Jason Brooks and his trashy family would have absolutely nothing to do with my life. He would have to face the apocalyptic consequences of his actions entirely alone, penniless, drowning in debt and raising the bastard child of the man his mistress really loved. It was without a doubt the most poetic justice a traitor could ever receive. Life without Natalie Caldwell was worse than hell for Jason. Not only was he utterly ruined, but the crushing weight of a $500,000 legal judgment hung over his neck like a guillotine. Haley, realizing Jason was now completely worthless, quickly reconnected with her rich ex-boyfriend and fled in the middle of the night, leaving the baby and the entire mess behind. Jason was forced to take on brutal, grueling odd jobs just to survive and buy baby formula. The man who once wore custom Italian suits and drove a luxury Audi was now hauling boxes in a Newark warehouse and doing day labor on construction sites. The brutal reality of his new life nearly drove him insane. In his absolute despair, his mind kept wandering back to me, to the life of endless luxury he once had. Remembering my past tenderness, he deluded himself into thinking I was just punishing him, and that if he showed true, pathetic remorse, my heart would soften and I would take him back. He decided to make one final, desperate gamble, appealing to my mercy. One afternoon, during a torrential New York downpour, Jason and his mother showed up at the Horizon Ventures skyscraper. Instead of his scruffy look, he was wearing the cleanest clothes he had left, though they were frayed and cheap. The security guards intercepted them immediately in the grand marble lobby. "I'm sorry, miss. Caldwell has left strict orders not to admit you." But Jason was prepared. Instead of throwing a tantrum, he suddenly dropped to his knees right in the middle of the bustling lobby. "Please, I'm begging you," he screamed, his voice hoarse and pitiful. "Just let me see her. I just want to apologize. I was a fool. I did everything wrong." His theatrical display instantly drew a crowd. Wall Street bankers, tech founders, and employees flowing in and out of the building all stopped to stare. His mother immediately joined the performance. She collapsed onto the marble floor, wailing and lamenting her son's suffering and her ex-daughter-in-law's cruelty. "My daughter-in-law is a billionaire and she abandoned my son. She treats him like garbage because he's poor now. Have you ever seen such a heartless woman?" The lobby morphed into a grotesque circus. The news quickly reached my desk. Karen practically ran into my office looking highly stressed. "Miss Caldwell, Jason Brooks and his mother are making a massive scene in the main lobby. He's on his knees and refuses to leave." I was reviewing a quarterly earnings report. I didn't even lift my eyes from the iPad. "Let them," I said, my voice ice cold. "Let them put on their little show. I want to see how long his knees hold out on that marble." But Jason was more stubbornly desperate than I anticipated. Despite the soaking wet clothes and the humiliating stares of hundreds of New Yorkers, he stayed on his knees for 2 solid hours. He was pale, shivering, and looked genuinely pathetic. Finally, I decided to end the farce. I didn't want the firm's pristine image associated with these bottom feeders for another minute. I stood up and took the private elevator down to the lobby. My arrival caused a ripple through the crowd. Jason, seeing me step out of the elevator, looked at me like I was a descending angel of salvation. He practically crawled on his knees toward me, trying to grab my legs. "Natalie, please, Natalie." He tilted his head back, his gaunt face streaked with rain and tears. "Forgive me, just this once. I messed up. I'm a monster. I'm worse than an animal. I never should have hit you. I never should have betrayed you." He started slapping himself across the face, the sharp smacks echoing through the lobby. "Look, I've been punished. I've lost everything. My life is a living hell. Natalie, I still love you. Can't we just start over? I swear to God I'll never hurt you again. I'll be your slave for the rest of my life." It was a sickening, pathetic display. Years ago it might have broken my heart, but the Natalie standing before him now had a heart carved from diamond. I took a step back to avoid his filthy hands. I looked down at the sniveling man at my feet with dead, unfeeling eyes. "Get up, Jason. Don't dirty the floor of my building." My freezing tone stunned him. "You love me," I laughed, a dry, hollow laugh. "No, you don't love me. You loved the unlimited credit cards and the penthouse lifestyle I provided you. And now that you're rotting in the gutter, you crawl back here with this pathetic act." "No, that's not true," he denied frantically. "I loved you, I really enough." I cut him off sharply. "I'm sick of hearing you speak. Whatever we had died the exact second you raised your hand to me. You should be thanking whatever God you pray to that I only sued you civilly. Instead of having you locked in Rikers for assault, I turned to the head of security. Throw these two out onto the street. If they continue to loiter, call the NYPD and press trespassing charges. With that, I turned on my heel, not granting him another syllable. Natalie, don't walk away, Jason screamed in absolute despair as the massive security guards grabbed him by the armpits and dragged him toward the revolving doors. Natalie, you heartless bitch, you'll regret this. I swear to God you'll regret this. I won't regret a thing. You're the one who will be drowning in regret for the rest of your miserable life. After being violently expelled from my corporate headquarters, Jason's path to appealing to my mercy was permanently bricked over. Despair rapidly curdled into toxic rage. A cornered rat will eventually resort to madness, and Jason was no exception. He pivoted to his final, most desperate tactic, blackmail. A few days later, I received an email from an encrypted anonymous address. It was from Jason. The tone had violently shifted from pathetic begging to blatant extortion. Natalie, don't push me over the edge. I know what you care about most is your precious Wall Street reputation. Horizon Ventures is in the middle of a massive funding round. How do you think your Silicon Valley investors will react if rumors start leaking to the press about the CEO's messy, scandalous private life? How she violently destroyed her ex-husband, or maybe they'd like to hear about some of the creative accounting and shady corporate secrets I saw while I was project director. I know where the bodies are buried. You don't want this on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, do you? Wire $10 million into an offshore account I provide. Consider it a non-disclosure fee. Once the money clears, I vanish from your life forever. If you don't, I'm burning your entire empire to the ground. I read the email and actually burst out laughing in my office. Corporate secrets. A moron who only knew how to run multi-million-dollar projects straight into the ground thought he understood high-level venture capital strategy. He was catastrophically overestimating his own intelligence. And as for my reputation, did he really think some baseless tabloid rumors could sink a titan of Wall Street? I didn't reply. My silence seemed to drive him insane. The next day, he sent another email, this time attaching a few PDF files he genuinely thought were smoking guns. They were nothing more than outdated project blueprints he had entirely misinterpreted. This is just a taste, Natalie. You have 3 days. If 10 million isn't wired in 72 hours, I'm sending the real files to every major media outlet in New York. I decided it was time to permanently exterminate this pest. I couldn't allow a parasite like Jason to keep buzzing around my life, I replied, agreeing to meet him at an obscure empty diner in Queens. I intended for it to be the absolute last time I ever saw his face. Jason strutted into the diner looking arrogant and smug. He genuinely believed he finally had his foot on my throat. Well, have you thought about my offer? He sneered, sliding into the vinyl booth across from me. I didn't say a word. I simply pulled my iPad Pro out of my bag, set it on the table, and slid it toward him. Before we discuss the 10 million, I think you need to watch this. A video was playing on the screen. It was the high-definition security footage I had subpoenaed from St. Clair's clinic. The video clearly captured from multiple angles the entire scene of Jason screaming at me, rearing back, and viciously slapping me across the face. Jason's cocky smirk vanished instantly, the color draining from his face. WH. Where did you get this? You don't need to know, I replied coldly. You just need to know that if this video is handed over to the NYPD and the Manhattan District Attorney, you will be indicted for felony assault. With my legal team pushing for maximum sentencing, how many years do you think you'll rot in a state penitentiary? He was paralyzed, struck dumb. Before he could even process the threat, I opened another file. This time it was an audio recording. Don't worry, Mom. I'm shipping her off on a business trip to San Francisco. It's the perfect window to get Haley into the VIP maternity ward. By the time Natalie gets back, the kid will be born. Then I'll slowly figure out how to hijack the firm's equity and kick her out of the Greenwich house. She's just a woman and she's barren anyway. Without an heir, she'll lose it all eventually. It was Jason's own voice. The conversation he had with his mother that I had secretly recorded on my phone the night I found out. This was my true kill shot. Hearing his own voice, his vile, predatory conspiracy laid completely bare, Jason psychologically shattered. He turned the color of a fresh corpse, his entire body trembling uncontrollably. He stared at me, and the arrogance in his eyes had been entirely replaced by raw, suffocating terror. You. He couldn't string 2 words together. I turned off the iPad and slipped it back into my designer bag. I locked eyes with him, my voice as cold as the vacuum of space, yet ringing with absolute authority. Jason, what do you honestly think you're holding? What you call secrets are nothing but a laughable joke to me. But the evidence I am holding is more than enough to have you locked in a concrete cell for years. Do you understand me? He nodded frantically, his cheap shirt soaking through with a cold sweat. $10 million. I let out a mocking laugh. I'll give you a choice right now. Option 1, take this. I pulled a thick stack of $100 bills, about $5,000 out of my purse, and tossed it onto the sticky table. Take this cash. Leave New York. Disappear into whatever hole you crawled out of and never ever let me see your face again. Option 2, we end this meeting and my next stop is the NYPD precinct. Choose. Jason stared at the stack of cash, then up at me, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He knew he had lost. He had lost totally, miserably, and irreversibly. With violently trembling hands, he snatched the stack of bills, shoved them into his coat pocket, and scrambled out of the booth. He didn't even dare to make eye contact with me. I choose. Option 1. With that, he sprinted out of the diner as if the devil himself were chasing him. I sat there alone, finishing my black coffee. The grand, miserable farce was finally over. That man had been permanently excised from my life. After Jason evaporated from my world, it felt like the very oxygen in New York had become purer. But I knew that to truly begin my new life, I had to violently scrub away every lingering fingerprint of the past. The first thing I did was list the sprawling Greenwich mansion on the market. It was a stunning architectural masterpiece, the crown jewel of my early success, but its walls held too many toxic memories. Every corner reminded me of Jason, of the fabricated days I once mistook for genuine happiness. I refused to live in a sanctuary haunted by the ghost of a parasite. Vanessa was slightly taken aback by my ruthless efficiency. Are you sure, Nat? That estate is absolutely gorgeous. I need a complete scorched earth reset, I replied firmly. If I keep it, I'll always be anchored to him. I didn't care if it sold under market value, I just wanted it liquidated. Given its prime Connecticut location and ultra-luxury finishes, an international buyer snapped it up almost immediately. The day I signed the closing papers, I felt zero nostalgia. Only a massive, soaring sense of liberation, like shedding a suffocating iron skin. Next, I orchestrated a brutal top-to-bottom restructuring of Horizon Ventures. Jason's disastrous tenure as project director had exposed severe vulnerabilities in our corporate governance and KPI tracking. I couldn't allow such weakness to exist in my empire ever again. I called an emergency board meeting, summoning every senior partner and department head. When I walked into the glass-walled boardroom, I noticed a subtle tension in the room. During the last few weeks while navigating the divorce apocalypse, I had delegated significant power to my VPs. Whispers had started circulating on Wall Street, rumors that my messy personal life had distracted me, that I was losing my edge, that my grip on the firm was slipping. Today, I was going to slit the throat of every single one of those rumors. I stood at the head of the massive mahogany table wearing a razor-sharp bespoke Tom Ford suit. My expression was lethal as I swept my gaze across the executives. Good morning, I began, my voice radiating absolute command. I did not call you here to discuss the past. The past is dead. Today we are mapping the aggressive future of Horizon Ventures. I unveiled a radically new, predatory growth strategy, an ambitious pivot, aggressively targeting emerging AI tech in Silicon Valley and high-yield global markets. I ruthlessly dissected the risk profiles, the capital requirements, and the exact roadmap for execution. Every metric, every projection, every argument I delivered was flawless, hyperlogical, and undeniable. The boardroom sat in stunned silence, entirely captivated by my presentation. Their initial skepticism rapidly mutated into profound awe. They weren't looking at a woman wounded by domestic drama. They were looking at a Wall Street titan operating at the absolute peak of her power, brilliant, fearless, and utterly ruthless. To execute this warpath, I continued, we require a lean, hyper-efficient machine. Therefore, effective immediately, I am gutting and rebuilding our performance evaluation architecture at every single tier. Everyone from junior analysts to senior partners will be audited based on raw, undeniable ROI. You perform, you get rich. You fail, you get out. Horizon Ventures is no longer a sanctuary for mediocrity. A few executives who knew they had been coasting visibly paled, but the vast majority of the room practically vibrated with adrenaline. They saw an empire expanding and massive wealth on the horizon. The meeting concluded with unanimous, ferocious alignment. When the room cleared, I stood alone, staring out through the floor-to-ceiling glass at the jagged, towering skyline of Manhattan. The hurricane had passed. The ashes of a burning marriage hadn't buried me. They had forged me into something infinitely harder. The past was liquidated. The future was vast, terrifying, and completely mine, and I, Natalie Caldwell, was ready to conquer every inch of it. Half a year vanished in the blink of an eye. The suffocating heat of the New York summer gave way to a crisp, golden autumn. My life, having survived the apocalypse, finally settled into a rhythm of absolute tranquility. I no longer lived in the Connecticut suburbs. I had purchased a sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse in Tribeca featuring a 360-degree panoramic view of the glittering Manhattan skyline. It was sleeker, colder, but it was 100% mine. There was no ghost of Jason Brooks here. Every morning I woke up at 6 a.m., not out of panic for the market open, but to dedicate a full hour to Pilates and meditation. I learned to breathe, to genuinely feel the quiet power humming in my veins. My instructor mentioned that my aura had shifted dramatically. I no longer wore that defensive, hyper-aggressive armor 24/7. Now I projected a deep, unshakable gravity that radiated from within. At Horizon Ventures, the brutal restructuring had catapulted the firm into unprecedented hyper-growth. The aggressive AI investments I spearheaded had returned monstrous yields, entirely silencing the Wall Street skeptics and cementing my reputation as an apex predator in venture capital. I no longer felt the need to prove my worth to anyone. The billions in AUM were the only argument I needed. Weekends were no longer spent chained to a Bloomberg terminal. I spent time with my parents at their estate in the Hamptons, enjoying quiet dinners and listening to their stories. Seeing me completely resurrected from the wreckage of a toxic marriage finally put their anxieties to rest. My father, a ruthless titan of industry himself, poured me a glass of scotch, patted my shoulder, and said, "Nat, you've finally become a real killer. I'm proud of you." This afternoon, I was meeting Vanessa at a high-end discreet tea room in Soho. My fiercely loyal attorney and best friend was as sharp and vibrant as ever. "Look at you," Vanessa said, taking a sip of her matcha, scanning me up and down like a predator evaluating prey. "It's a proven fact a woman is at her absolute most lethal when she belongs to no one. With that energy you're throwing off, even I'm ready to propose." I laughed, a genuine rich sound. "Don't be dramatic, Van. I'm just at peace." "It's not just peace," Vanessa said, her tone dropping into sincerity. "It's liberation. Before, no matter how powerful you were on Wall Street, you were dragging around a 100-pound anchor named Jason. You were always contorting yourself to protect his fragile male ego, trying to keep up the facade for his sake. Now, you exist entirely for yourself. This right here, this is the real Natalie Caldwell." I sat in silence, letting her words sink in. She was dead right. I had spent years living for the illusion of love, chaining myself to a man who fundamentally despised my success. I had locked my own shackles and exhausted myself, dragging them around. Now that they were shattered, I realized just how massive and brilliant the world actually was. "Thank you, Van. I couldn't have butchered him so cleanly without you." "Please, between us, you don't need to say thank you," Vanessa smirked. "Seeing you thrive is my retainer. Oh, by the way, has anyone managed to catch the eye of our untouchable CEO lately?" I shook my head. "I'm not even looking. Right now, I'm genuinely enjoying being untouchable. Romance had plummeted to the bottom of my priority list. I was perfectly content without it. I had mastered the art of manufacturing my own happiness. I didn't need another human being to feel complete. We chatted for another hour. The soft afternoon sun filtered through the massive windows, painting the Soho streets in a warm, golden hue. Watching the impeccably dressed New Yorkers bustling by, I felt a bizarre, profound sense of calm. The storm really was over. There was only clear skies and absolute freedom ahead. My life flowed forward with that unshakable peace. I poured my energy into my empire, my physical health, and the small circle of people who had proven their loyalty. The name Jason Brooks, and every toxic memory attached to it, had been shoved into the darkest, dustiest corner of my brain. I wasn't actively trying to repress him. He had simply ceased to matter. He was less than an insect to me. One evening, at a high society charity gala at the MoMA, I happened to overhear a conversation. The speaker was Mr. Sterling, an older, gossipy hedge fund manager I occasionally did business with. He was holding court with a few other financiers, loudly discussing the latest scandal involving the heir to the Preston real estate group. "Did you guys hear?" Mr. Sterling said, sipping his champagne with a conspiratorial grin. "The Preston kid got caught up in a massive headache recently. Turns out that little blonde piece of trash he was keeping on the side went out, slept with some other loser, got knocked up and tried to pass the bastard off. As his word is young, Preston found out after the kid was born, went absolutely ballistic, and sent some of his associates to beat the living hell out of the other guy. I was standing near a marble pillar, a glass of Pinot Noir in my hand. Hearing the story, I froze for a fraction of a second. The narrative sounded incredibly familiar. Really, another manager asked, highly entertained, "Who's the idiot with a death wish who crossed the Prestons? Apparently some nobody who used to have a cushy gig. A VP or director at his ex-wife's VC firm." Mr. Sterling sneered with absolute disgust. But the absolute moron cheated on her, and his billionaire wife stripped him to the bone and threw him onto the street. Homeless and broke, he ran back to the Preston kid's mistress to try and mooch off her, and genuinely believed the bastard kid was his. I mean, it's hilarious. The guy is the biggest laughingstock in the tri-state area. Even though Mr. Sterling never dropped a name, I knew exactly who they were dissecting like a lab rat. Billionaire ex-wife ruined, claiming another man's bastard. Every puzzle piece fit perfectly. So that was how it ended. After I detonated their lives in court, Haley was inevitably caught by her real sugar daddy, the vicious heir to the Preston real estate empire. And Jason, the pathetic cuckold, became the punching bag for a billionaire's violent rage. I could perfectly visualize the aftermath, a savage beating, endless humiliation, and brutal threats, ensuring he fled New York and never breathed a word. I didn't feel a surge of sadistic satisfaction, nor did I feel an ounce of pity. I felt absolutely nothing, just a cold, clinical validation. It was exactly the ending he earned. You reap what you sow. Karma was a flawless accountant. He had used physical violence against me, and the universe had deployed violence to balance his ledger. He started the chain reaction, and he was crushed by the final explosion. I quietly turned around and stepped out onto the museum's terrace. The cool New York night breeze washed over me. I took a slow sip of my wine. A dry, complex flavor blossomed on my tongue. A few days later, my phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. "Nat, did you hear about Jason?" "Yeah, I caught wind of it at the MoMA gala," I replied, my tone flat. "Ah, so you know," Vanessa laughed darkly. "I got the full rundown from a buddy at the NYPD. Word is, Preston's goons shattered 3 of his ribs and fractured his jaw. He was so terrified he fled back to that dump in Ohio. He's drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and he had to sell his family's dilapidated house just to keep the loan sharks away. Oh, and his mother. She had a massive stroke from the stress and is permanently bedridden. Seriously, the universe doesn't miss." "No, it doesn't," I replied, feeling utterly detached. "You don't feel even a tiny bit of vindication?" Vanessa probed. I stayed silent for a moment, looking out my penthouse window at the sprawling city below. "No, Van. I really don't feel anything. Whatever happens to him, how he lives, if he dies in a ditch, it literally does not concern me. He's just a footnote in a very old book, and I burned that book a long time ago. It was the absolute truth. No matter how miserable, violent, or pathetic Jason's existence had become, it couldn't touch me. I had wasted too many years and too much capital on a parasite. My only focus now was my empire and my own unadulterated happiness. The news of the traitor's destruction was just a passing gust of wind that failed to ripple the glassy surface of my life. To celebrate the closing of a monstrously profitable tech acquisition, I decided to reward myself and my executive team with a corporate retreat that doubled as a philanthropic mission. We chartered a private flight to a remote, impoverished mining town deep in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. The landscape was breathtakingly rugged, but the reality of the people living there was harsh and unforgiving. We brought trucks loaded with textbooks, winter clothing, laptops, and medical supplies for the local elementary school. Seeing those kids wearing threadbare flannels and scuffed boots but with eyes shining like supernovas when they received a brand new backpack filled my chest with a raw, undeniable warmth. Sometimes real impact was that brutally simple. While my executives were running around playing football with the kids and distributing gear, my eyes landed on a little girl huddled alone on the splintered wooden steps of the schoolhouse. She was pale, shivering, and her forehead was drenched in sweat. I quickly walked over and placed the back of my hand against her brow. She was burning up. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I asked softly. She just shook her head, her wide eyes filled with quiet fear. One of the local teachers ran over and frantically explained that the nearest urgent care was 40 miles down a treacherous mountain road, and she had no way to get there. As I was pulling out my phone to arrange a medevac helicopter, a man stepped out of the tiny, underfunded school clinic. He was wearing a white coat, faded and worn at the elbows, but impeccably clean. He was tall, with a lean, athletic build and a sharp, angular jawline that radiated an intense, grounding calm. She's spiking a high fever, he said, his voice, a deep, soothing baritone. He quickly checked her vitals with a stethoscope and pulled a pediatric fever reducer from his worn medical bag. Don't panic. It's an aggressive viral strain going around. With this medication and some heavy rest, her temperature will break by tonight. With infinite practiced gentleness, he coaxed the little girl into taking the medicine. Only when her breathing steadied and she dozed off against the teacher's shoulder did he finally stand up and turn to me. Thank you for spotting her. I'm Dr. Lucas Ward. I volunteer here, he said, extending a calloused but steady hand, a warm, genuine smile breaking across his face. Natalie Caldwell, I replied, firmly shaking his hand. His grip was warm and grounding. Are you the only physician for the town? I just drive up here on the weekends, he explained, wiping his hands with a sanitizer wipe. Monday through Friday, I'm an attending trauma surgeon at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. But the medical infrastructure up here in the mountains is so shattered, I drive out whenever I have an off shift to run the clinic. Looking at him, a profound sense of respect washed over me. In my world, a world suffocated by cutthroat competition, algorithmic greed, and endless calculation, it was jarring to meet a man who voluntarily sacrificed his incredibly valuable time and elite skills for zero financial return, simply because it was the right thing to do. He was the absolute antithesis of the slick, empty men in Tom Ford suits I destroyed for a living. That's incredibly admirable, I said, genuinely meaning it. Lucas just chuckled softly, shaking his head. It's nothing crazy. Keeping these kids healthy is the payoff. Much like the tech you guys brought today, you're changing their entire trajectory. It means the world to them. We stood there and talked for a long while. He spoke passionately about the systemic failures, failing the Appalachian communities, about the resilience of the people. I told him about the macroeconomics of venture capital, about leveraging Silicon Valley wealth to build sustainable infrastructure. We came from two violently different universes, the blood-soaked trauma bays of Baltimore and the shark-infested boardrooms of Wall Street, but we found a magnetic alignment in our core values and how we viewed the world. When my security detail signaled it was time to head back to the airstrip, Lucas walked me out to the waiting SUV. It was genuinely an honor meeting you, Miss Caldwell. I hope we cross paths again. Likewise, Dr. Ward. The armored SUV pulled away, tires crunching on the gravel. Through the tinted glass, I watched his tall silhouette standing in the mountain mist, waving goodbye. A strange, soft warmth settled deep in my chest. I didn't know if I would ever actually see him again, but that brief collision of our worlds felt like a breath of pure oxygen, injecting a spark of something entirely new into my highly calibrated life. It wasn't a fairy tale love at first sight, nor was it a blinding, irrational passion. It was just a quiet, dignified beginning. A subtle reminder that outside the sterile glass towers of Wall Street there were still genuinely good men, and that relationships built on absolute equality and mutual respect actually existed. Perhaps the ice around my heart was finally ready to thaw. Upon returning to Manhattan, I plunged back into the corporate warfare with terrifying renewed energy. But the image of that misty Appalachian Valley, the laughing kids, and the calm eyes of Dr. Lucas Ward would occasionally flash across my mind between board meetings, reminding me that there was a massive beating heart to the world beyond quarterly earnings and profit margins. I didn't reach out to Lucas, and he didn't reach out to me. We were like two parallel lines that had briefly intersected before continuing on our own immense trajectories, but I knew that brief encounter had left an indelible mark on my armor. Late one Friday night, after a grueling week of acquisitions, I found myself alone in my sprawling penthouse. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I let the ambient neon glow of the city below illuminate the vast living space. This fortress in the sky was the physical manifestation of my blood, sweat, and absolute ruthlessness. I poured myself a glass of vintage Cabernet and stepped out onto the expansive glass terrace. The autumn wind whipped across my face, sharp and biting. Hundreds of feet below, the endless river of red taillights flowed down Broadway, and the city that never sleeps buzzed with arrogant electric power. New York City at night was truly spectacular, a vicious, beautiful, unforgiving machine. There was a time in a past life when I believed my ultimate victory was standing on a balcony like this with Jason sharing the empire I had built. I foolishly believed that a man's love was the ultimate sanctuary, the final puzzle piece of a successful woman's life. I was so incredibly wrong. True sanctuary doesn't come from a husband, and it certainly doesn't come from a marriage certificate. It is forged in the fires of your own absolute independence. It comes from the freedom to be exactly who you are, to conquer your own ambitions, and to dictate the terms of your own existence without ever having to justify yourself to a lesser man. The violent implosion of my marriage to Jason nearly broke me, but it paid the tuition for the most valuable lesson of my life. It violently opened my eyes to the reality that the only person on this earth you can implicitly, absolutely trust is yourself. Inner fortitude, overwhelming financial sovereignty, and an unbreakable mind are the only true assets in this world, and they are assets no one can ever steal from you. The hurricane had long since passed. The ashes of my past hadn't choked me. They had provided the fertilizer for me to resurrect as something infinitely more dangerous and radiant. I took a slow sip of the heavy, dark wine. A complex, bittersweet fire bloomed in my chest. I no longer harbored a single drop of bitterness or hatred. Looking out over my city, my heart was a fortress of absolute peace and an unbreakable, predatory faith in whatever came next. Maybe one day I would allow myself to fall in love again. Maybe it would be with Dr. Lucas Ward. Or maybe it would be with another man who actually possessed the strength to stand beside me. But whether I fell in love or remained untouchable forever, it was no longer the defining metric of my life, because I finally knew with absolute certainty that I could build a magnificent, complete universe all on my own. I smiled. A slow, genuine, terrifyingly beautiful smile that radiated from the absolute core of my soul. I looked up at the starless, glowing Manhattan sky and felt as though I held the entire world by the throat. Natalie Caldwell, you do not need a king to be a queen. You have already conquered your own empire, and you deserve every magnificent, ruthless thing this world has to offer.